Welcome to Leadership Moments.
In every great leader's life, there are pivotal moments that shape their character, test their resilience, and awaken their vision.
Together, we'll uncover the invaluable lessons hidden within these transformative moments.
Good morning. I am Tracy Ann Palmer, and I am here with my fabulous co-host, Stacey Caster. Welcome to our podcast, Leadership Moments. And we're going to jump right in to talk about global cultures in the workforce. And this is a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this today. Together, we're going to delve into the impact of cultural differences on global business and share key lessons for leaders aiming to foster effective international collaborations.
Yeah, Stacey, isn't it incredible how sort of interconnected our world has become? Companies are expanding across borders. I mean, that's always been there, but just it's more of the penetration into those growth areas, right? If you think about all those emerging markets, and that's made the teams more and more diverse than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely. But, with this diversity comes the challenge of navigating cultural differences that, if misunderstood, can lead to conflicts and decrease productivity. I know some of our clients, we've worked with them.
Yeah. And as an immigrant, from Africa, right? We all speak English, but it doesn't always mean the same thing. I can tell you that. So, I got some really funny stories when I first arrived here of, words that are completely the same and mean completely different things.
I think you have to give at least one of those stories now that you mention it.
Well, everyone knows about, the robot and the traffic light. But I will never forget, I was in Chicago and I was in a taxi. And I'm going, turn left at the robot, turn left at the robot. And the guy, he's like looking at me and he's just going straight because, like, what is robot lady? Like, that doesn't mean anything, But I will tell you, this has got nothing to do with language, but I do have to share this with our audience because this was really funny. I went to a diner with a friend and I'd ordered a plate of French fries. And at diners, they always have that like big tub of sugar that you just pour out.
Yes. For your coffee.
For your coffee. Okay. Well, first of all, we don't have pour out sugar. Like if you do sugar, you do it with a teaspoon. Okay. So immediately, I'm looking at it thinking there's no way that would ever be sugar. And I take the thing and I start pouring it all over my fries, thinking it's salt. Because who puts sugar in a tub that doesn't have a teaspoon? Okay. And the person next to me is like, wide, saucer-eyed, looking at me like, really? And she said, you've just poured sugar all over your fries, right? Sugar? This is not salt? No. I mean, this was... there are so many examples, I can't even begin to tell you, of how different it is. And by the way, in the States, the States, like if you go from city to city, it's like a different culture completely.
Yeah,
it's
for
crazy.
Sure. Yeah, just like soda, pop, Coke. It depends on where you are in the world on which one resonates with you.
That's it. I say rubbish bin. When I say rubbish bin, people are like, what's a rubbish bin? It's a trash can. Or I say lip ice. What's lip ice? Lip balm. You can go on and on and on. It's pretty funny. But, when we start talking about these communication styles, did you know that cultures are often categorized as low context or high context when it comes to communication? That was a new thought for me, by the way.
Yeah. And what we found when we looked into it is that in low context cultures, which is like the United States, England, and Australia, communication is direct and explicit. So people say what they mean, and meaning is conveyed primarily through words. And what did we find with high context, Tracy Ann?
Yeah, on the other hand, this high context culture like Japan, China, India rely very heavily on non-verbal cues and the surrounding context, meaning it's often derived from tone, gestures, and situational factors.
Yeah, so you can see how this can lead to misunderstandings between these cultures. So, for example, a straightforward American manager might unintentionally offend a Japanese colleague who expects a more nuanced approach.
Yeah. You know, another critical aspect is attitudes towards hierarchy and power distance. Um, in power distance cultures such as India and China, there's an acceptance of unequal power distribution. And actually, interesting about that, I was raised in somewhat of a similar, at the time, you know, in a very similar way back in Zimbabwe. South Africa less so, but in Zimbabwe more so, interesting enough.
Yeah. It's kind of like what we are talking about. Even in the States, you
Yeah,
can have different differences, right?
that's
For
right. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, that's right. So employees may wait for explicit instructions and might hesitate to express disagreement. So, in contrast, that's with low power distance cultures like the US and England, where open communication across hierarchical levels is very common.
Yeah, so imagine a Chinese employee waiting for specific directions from a South African manager who expects initiative. So, without understanding these cultural expectations, both parties might get really frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah, and not even realize why, right? And
Yeah,
that's why it's so
exactly.
important and why we're talking about this today, to help you
Yeah,
understand that there might be something there that you just don't know. So we're trying
yeah.
to bring that stuff to light for you. You know, time management is also viewed differently across cultures too. So monochronic cultures like Japan and Germany, they value punctuality and strict adherences to schedules.
Yeah, and I would say in those cultures, you know, they have sort of this very more of a conservative, you know, approach to these kinds of things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Meanwhile, you know, a polychronic culture such as India and Costa Rica, they have more of a fluid approach to time. Relationships may take precedence over strict timelines. Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah, it's crazy. So you can see how this can affect business interactions, right? I mean, an American team might be frustrated by delayed responses from their Indian counterparts, not realizing that the relationship building process is equally important.
So let's talk about individualism versus collectivism. In individualistic cultures like the US and Australia, personal achievement is emphasized.
Yeah. Conversely, collectivist cultures like China and Japan prioritize group harmony and collective well being, you know, when decisions are made with the group's interest in mind.
And it's interesting because I just recently sort of got exposure to a US based company versus a Chinese based company and how they structure their MBOs. The US based company does it on an individual, the Chinese company has done it on a team based. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, it
You know,
is.
a leader rewarding individual performance in a collectivist culture might inadvertently cause discomfort among team members who value group recognition and sort of this team dynamic, right?
Yeah, yeah, so interesting. You know, decision making process can also vary. Some cultures prefer consensual decision making, taking time to ensure that everyone agrees, like in Japan.
Oh my gosh, I so appreciate that in working with our global teams. Really
Yes.
amazing. You know, others might adopt a top-down approach with leaders making quick decisions. I mean, we've seen that that's very common. You know, that's US, India. You know, very very common in those cultures.
Right, right. And understanding these preferences is so vital. So, pressuring a Japanese team for immediate decisions might lead to stress and poor
Mm,
outcomes. And, let's not say alone the actual working relationship, too, on top of it, right?
totally, absolutely. Uh, so let's shift to this attitude towards this uncertainty and risk. Okay, um, cultures are also different in their comfort with uncertainty. High uncertainty avoidance cultures like Japan prefer very clear rules and structures.
Yeah, low uncertainty avoidance cultures like Australia embrace change and innovation, proposing bold changes without considering a culture's risk tolerance can lead to pushback, right? So, trust building is another area where cultures diverge as well. Task based cultures focus on professional competence, while relationship based cultures value personal connections. We talk a lot about those personal connections with our networking and everything, don't we?
Yeah, all the time. And in countries like China and India, investing time in relationships is crucial before business can even proceed effectively. I mean, working with all of those groups, I know, like if you didn't go and visit and be in their region, if you were, had global responsibility, uh, that was that was not good. That was not good.
Right, right. So, I mean,
Not
it just
acceptable.
shows like skipping this step might hinder negotiations and
That's it.
partnerships if you don't be careful.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Uh, the emotional expressiveness varies too, right? So, like neutral cultures like Japan control the emotional displays, right? Viewing them as actually unprofessional.
Yeah, yeah, right. And effective cultures like India and Costa Rica are more open with emotions. Misinterpreting these expressions can lead to misunderstanding. So it's so important to understand that. The formality levels also differ across cultures. Formal cultures place importance on titles and
Mhm.
protocols as well.
Yeah, and even for instance, like using first names or casual attire in these settings, like in Japan, that would might be seen as disrespectful.
Right, right. Something as simple as that, right?
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
about the casual attire in America now in the
yeah.
workplace. You got to think about who's your audience, who are you getting on that screen with, what does that look like? Definitely things to think about.
And the last category that we wanted to touch on was this category of sort of gender roles, hierarchical roles, and perceptions of gender roles can impact business. Some cultures have traditional views, potentially challenging women in leadership positions. We know this, right?
Yeah, it's so important for organizations to be aware of these dynamics and support inclusive practices.
Yeah, and actually, on that one, I want to give you an example. So, in one of my previous organizations, our leader of Asia Pac was a woman, and a she was having a meeting with someone who wanted to potentially do business with her, and she was in the boardroom, and he came in and he said, "Would you mind getting me a cup of coffee?" And she looked at this individual very kindly, and she said, "My apologies, I don't think we've met." Gave her name, told who she was, and he, of course, was incredibly embarrassed. And she said, "If you would like a cup of coffee, I can show you where the room is to go get a cup of coffee." But that's an exact example of expectation, assumptions, right?
Yeah.
That we have to be very careful of
Well, and let's
to not
just
make
pause for a
it.
second on how she handled that. It was
Oh
very
yeah,
professional. It was seeking to
very.
understand, saying, I don't think you understand the situation here, right? Rather than reacting and could have reacted in a very negative way,
Yes,
handled it
yes,
very professionally.
yes, yes. And I think that that lends itself just to why Stacey and I are sharing this with all of you here today too. Is there's a lot of there's a lot of nuances between these cultures, right? And as leaders, when we look at performance, when we look at, or if we feel a sense of frustration or anything like that, we really have to take a step back and make sure that we understand people's backgrounds and their experiences. Don't you agree, Stacey?
Yeah. Yeah. It's that seeking to understand and not just assuming that the way that you have lived, the way that you have worked, the culture that you've been in is the norm. It is respecting those cultures, and the way of respecting is understanding them and making sure that you're moving forward with them and working on something together, what works for you and what works for them. It's all about
That's right.
respect.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So we wanted to just give you some case studies that are really great examples of how these misunderstandings can lead to business failure, actually. And there've been some notable ones where
Yeah.
cultural misunderstandings have really led to massive business failures.
Right, right. So, for instance, let's take Walmart's failure in Germany due to imposing American best practices or business practices without adapting to local customs. So, let's just give a little background. So, Walmart entered the German market in 1997 by acquiring an existing retail chains. They acquired multiple of them. Now, the cultural misunderstandings that they had customer service practices where Walmart's friendly greeters and baggers were seen as intrusive by German shoppers accustomed to self service. And then they also had employee relations situations where mandatory morning chats and company cheers were uncomfortable for German employees. And then in addition, they had pricing strategy where Walmart tried to undercut local prices, violating German anti-competition laws. And then finally, when you talk about the cultural misunderstandings, there's labor relations. They ignored Germany's strong labor unions and worker councils, leading to legal and employee relation issues. So important. And then we talk about the impact, right? So after nearly a decade of losses totaling around 1 billion, Walmart exited the German market in 2006. And that's just one big example of how you can't go in assuming that things are going to be the same.
Yeah, and there's been many companies. I mean, Walmart is not an exception. Disney, I know had areas as well that they had to pivot. There's been different food franchises, for example, right?
Yeah.
It's really something to be taken very seriously, especially as you're entering some of these markets. Another one, and this one I read years ago in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. I have never forgotten it. I've used it as an example many times because to me it was so tragic. So it's the story of the crash of the Avianca Flight 52, where cultural communication styles contributed to a failure to declare an emergency. So the engines failed due to no gas, no fuel. Okay. And the plane crashed approximately 15 miles from JFK, killing 73 of the 158 people on board. So the question is, why did this happen? Okay. The Colombian scores, the Colombian or the folks who were on the plane, they score very high on the Hofstede's Power Distance Index, meaning that there's a strong hierarchical structure. Okay, some audience may be less likely to challenge superior or assertive or assert themselves. So the impact in this instance was the first officer and the flight engineer were hesitant to forcefully communicate the urgency to both the captain and air traffic control. Okay. And the captain responsible for declaring an emergency did not really declare it as an emergency. Okay. So ATC did not really grasp the severity of what was going on because the pilot's language was really non-assertive and indirect. So the first officer says, well, we're running out of fuel, which can be interpreted as, oh, I've got a concern, but it's not an emergency, right? Whereas a standard aviation protocol for ATC would have been like Mayday, pan, like indicate like distress, right? And so there was a complete misinterpretation of what the real situation was. So air traffic control didn't know that they were out of gas, didn't know they were out of fuel, and they crashed. They actually ended up putting them in a holding pattern, and they crashed because of a lack of understanding of the hierarchical, and ATC expects a certain protocol. They think by saying we're running out of fuel that they've given them enough warning, right? So what a tragedy, but a real extreme example of just how serious this lack of communication or understanding of hierarchical differences, cultural differences can actually have.
Yeah. Yeah, it is sad.
So as we sort of wrap up here for some key lessons, what can leaders do to navigate these complexities, Stacey? What do you think?
Yeah, well, first, invest in cultural awareness training. If you haven't already done that, understanding the norms and values of different cultures is foundational. Like Tracy and you and I even working together, there's times that you say stuff and I'm like, I don't know what you mean, right? And we help each other and vice versa. So it still happens today, even after years of working together.
That's right. Yeah. And even just, I can be, for example, very direct because that's a culture that I come from. And when I'm very direct, it's because I'm doing it from the heart and I'm doing it with best intention. But I know that that is something I need to be careful of because that can sometimes come across as disrespectful or yeah, just disrespectful, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So, I think effective communication is really critical. You've got to, encourage clear, respectful dialogue and be mindful of language barriers. Be mindful also that not all words mean the same thing in different
Yeah.
cultures.
So true. And adaptability is key. Be willing to adjust your management style to accommodate cultural preferences. You have to be willing.
I think that's an important one, Stace, because I do believe that we think everyone needs to adjust to us, and that is not
Yeah.
how it works, right?
Especially when you're a leader, you can get caught in that trap.
Yeah. Servant leadership, and especially today, is really about influencing, and you have to be the chameleon. You have to figure out everyone is motivated differently, influenced differently, and you've got to figure that out and you've got to adjust accordingly. It's not the other way around. The other one is, building relationships cannot be overstated. Cannot be overstated. In many cultures, trust is the currency of business. And I'm not talking about, oh, you've got to be everybody's friend and it's all about relationships. No, because, it's got to be about, execution, relationships, all of that. But trust is the currency of business. Do not forget that.
Yeah. I guess another thing to think about too is engaging local experts can provide invaluable
Yes.
insights as well. They can guide organizations through the nuances of the cultural practices. I know that if I'm starting to work with someone from a different cultural background, I lean on my network to contact people to say that may have had experience with that. They may be from that culture, whatever that may be, and say, hey, what are some things I need to realize here? What's the best way to engage this person and collaborate with them and work with them?
Stacey, that's such an excellent point. I really love that because, um, I don't think we do enough of that actually.
Right.
I mean, that's the most logical thing to do, right? Is to find out, how does it work? And I actually remember when I joined a team once, I reached out to one of the high potential young ladies on our team, and she was from Indian descent. But we had a fascinating conversation about just how similar our upbringing was around, that hierarchical status, and that not really saying what you thought because of the hierarchical status. And we worked together on that because we'd both come from that kind of background, right? Mm-hmm. The other one is navigating multicultural diversity. It's not just about avoiding misunderstandings, but it's about leveraging the richness that different perspectives bring. To me, that always comes back to that inclusivity of thought, experience, and backgrounds.
The reality is, leaders who embrace cultural intelligence can drive innovation, open new markets, and build stronger, more cohesive teams.
That's right. Just a fascinating topic. So much more to cover, but that's it for the wrap. So thank you so much for joining Stacey and I. This is a fascinating subject. There's so much more to talk about and lots of case studies. So please subscribe to leadershipmomentspodcast.com. We'd love to get your feedback and your thoughts. And we hope that this discussion really leads you all to be more effective in your globalized world.
And until next time, stay curious and keep bridging those cultural gaps. And that concludes another episode of Leadership Moments. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights in what we shared today. Remember, leadership is not defined solely by titles or positions, but by the choices we make and the moments that shape us.
Embrace the challenges that come your way, for they may be the very moments that propel you toward greatness. We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories as well. Connect with us on our website at leadershipmomentspodcast.com or through social media on Instagram at Tracy_Ann Palmer.
And Stacey Castor _. Remember, your leadership moment could be just around the corner, waiting for you to seize it. This is Stacey Castor, and what doesn't challenge you won't change you.
And this is Tracy Ann Palmer. And be the change you wish to see in the world.